Oh my god, I hate waiting. Here we go. We're going to learn about how the US becomes a world power. If you see the cartoon here, it's Uncle Sam from when he was a baby all the way up to when he becomes a really large person. And the captions there see all big events that happen in the United States, 1898, and then 1899 when the US invades Cuba and overthrows Spain. They become this massive world power like the one that we know today. And here are all the hands anxious to be on the good side of Uncle Sam, says now he is the mega power of the world. First thing we should know is the frontier thesis from Frederick Jackson Turner. It said after the US beat all the Indians, moved to the west from sea to shining sea, the frontier was now closed. And with that, the United States needed to find another way to be awesome. Motives for expansion. We're going to see reasons why the U.S. decides to expand. First one you want to write down is profits, making the big bucks, cash money, payola, lettuce. That's all I got. So first for profits, basic thing to understand is that this time it's the second industrial revolution. We've got all these factories, they're producing steel, producing textiles, you name it, the US is producing it, except they're producing way too much of it. And when that happens is you need more people to buy our stuff, and that's one reason to take over another country, get a bigger market for your goods, and also to prevent another depression. It seems about every 10 years or so there's a depression in the United States. There's one in 1893, and so soon after 1893 is when the US starts to expand into other countries. Part of it is profits. The other big one is patriotism. Patriotism is showing off our muscles, showing off our big red, white, and blue biceps, bro. And one of the biggest proponents of showing off that national power is a person that you'll have to know, Alfred Thayer Mahan. He will influence many of the leaders of the United States to expand. He is a naval strategist, and he wrote this really awesome book called The Influence of Sea Power on History. It's so awesome that I never read it. I don't plan on reading it, but that's his book. And in his book, he outlines some key things. He argues that national power depended on having a strong navy. At this time in the 1880s, 1890s, there's no airplanes, so the navy is your strongest military force. Control the seas. He also suggests that the U.S. go around to all different places around the world, set up shop there, control little pieces, little pockets, ports, and use them to trade with countries like China, Japan. And lastly, he says the U.S. needs a canal somewhere in Central America would be the ideal location where the land starts to narrow out before it reaches South America. We could turn that some spot there into a canal. That way, the U.S. when they trade from the East Coast to the West, they don't have to go just by train, and they don't have to go all the way down below the tip of South America and come all the way around. Next thing is politics. Politics shaping public opinion. The biggest shapers of public opinion will be the media. Yeah, the media. On the left side, you have Joseph Pulitzer, whose name should be familiar to you from the Pulitzer Prize, the award given to the best journalists and writers of the year. Uh, and on the right, you have William Randolph Hearst, who also is the competing newspaper guy. used to own the newspaper here in LA, the Herald Examiner. So what these two do is they compete and influencing public opinion. The biggest thing they push is something called yellow journalism. It's an exaggerated form of news meant to strike at people's feelings, get them angry, get them on one side. Today, yellow journalism might be called, I don't know, fake news. Those are two newspaper guys to remember. The last one, as a reason for expansion, religion. What the other wants to know is religion, the civilizing mission. These are racist ideas based on social Darwinism, survival of the fittest. The U.S. became a powerful industrial powerhouse because they just had those characteristics. They worked hard and they had a lot of talent, while other countries that are smaller than the U.S., they lack talent, they lack the hard work because they're lazy. They just don't have those characteristics, and it's probably the duty of the United States to go over there and show them those. So the idea is to spread political liberty, spread Protestant Christianity, spread American values, civilize the inferior people of the world. And one of the biggest proponents of this is Josiah Strong. He is a strong believer in the Anglo-Saxon race. The Anglo-Saxons, if you don't know, are whites that originate from England around there. And his duty is to go to different countries, civilize and Christianize the savages of the world. At least that's his belief. So now we got our motives for expansion. We'll see some of the places the U.S. will go to in the late 1800s, starting with Hawaii. Nice place to go to, but not currently. So Americans first arrive to Hawaii in the 1820s. U.S. missionaries go there to convert some of the native Hawaiians to Protestant Christianity. Secondly, you have treaties set up, one being for trading and the other for setting up a military base. So there's three reasons here. There's the motives: religion, profits, and patriotism, setting up a base at Pearl Harbor. Their biggest exports are sugar and then pineapple, the thing that SpongeBob lives inside of under the sea. Absorbent, of course, is he. One of the first issues with Hawaii springs out from the McKinley Tariff in 1890, which raised the cost of exporting sugar. It raised the cost from about 38% to almost 50%. This angered sugar exporters in Hawaii. They invested their money in Hawaii, and this, since Hawaii was not part of the U.S., they desired to make it part of the U.S. to avoid the tariff. McKinley will later become president in 1897, and so while Americans, they want control of Hawaii, Hawaiians, on the other hand, resent the influence of American sugar interests. They want these Americans out. And the leader that wants to throw out the Americans would be Queen Liliuokalani. She assumes the throne in 1891 of Hawaii, and quickly she wants to get rid of the businessmen and the sugar interests and restore it to native Hawaiians. Of course, this will leave those folks not too happy. So these white businessmen are angered, and as are the sugar planters, and they devise a plan using the military to get rid of Liliuokalani, and they succeed in overthrowing Liliuokalani. However, President Grover Cleveland does not approve of this coup and wants her restored, but that will not happen. And instead, Hawaii falls into the hands of white businessmen and their sugar planters. But eventually, by 1898, Hawaii will become be annexed by the U.S., and the U.S. will have full control of Hawaii. So after Hawaii, the next place we'll see is Cuba. Cubans will want to be free from the control of Spain. In 1895, the Cubans feel it's time to revolt and get rid of the Spanish, so there will be a revolt led, and it will not be successful because the Spanish quickly send Valeriano Butcher Whaler to crush the revolt. Butcher, very menacing name from this guy. He also looks like someone you don't want to mess with. Look at all those medals on his uniform. He responds quickly and puts thousands of Cubans into concentration camps. They're not well fed. They're forced into do heavy labor. Thousands will perish, and the stories that come about from this will get spread by people like Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst, and of course yellow journalists. Yellow journalism will spread to the United States, and Americans start to get angry. They start to push for something to be done, for the United States to respond. At this time, there is President William McKinley, and the public wants President William McKinley to show off that bad American muscle and take out the Spanish from neighboring Cuba. However, there has to be a reason for it. It can't just be yellow journalism, and McKinley will look for that reason, and eventually he will get it with the February of 1898, the USS Maine will find itself traveling through Spanish harbors going towards Cuba, and suddenly it will explode, killing all the passengers on board. You are members of the Navy that just joined the Air Force. Reports of this will get spread all over will turn into yellow journalism. Quickly, there's reports from the world newspaper that Spain blew up the ship, when in fact that didn't likely happen. Most likely the engine room got too hot and blew up the room with all the ammo, and that led to this massive explosion. But the public needed a reason for McKinley to go into war, and they got it thanks to yellow journalism. And we'll see some yellow journalism in current times. But here's the actual headline for the USS Maine's explosion. The New York Journal, big bold letters, $50,000 reward for if the perpetrator is caught. And there's some also quotes here. The explosion was not an accident. Journal will offer $50K, and it's meant to capture your attention and to be angry that these damn Spanish rat bastards just blew up an American vessel. And here is another newspaper with a slightly different tone. Divers to find whether the force of the explosion was from the exterior or interior. This one's a little more investigative, and notice doesn't have the shouting headline at you. Of course, this is at a smaller section of the newspaper. So America goes to the rescue to save Cubans from Spanish misrule. And the key thing here is Americans want war. However, McKinley does not want to go to war. But the explosion of the Maine and a letter from a Spanish ambassador named Delome that criticizes McKinley and basically calls him soft, leads to McKinley declaring war and asking Congress to declare war on Spain in April. And one of the things to know is the Teller Amendment. Congress agrees that the U.S. will not permanently control Cuba after they defeat Spain. Cuba will be left for the Cubans. They will have autonomy. At least that's what the Teller Amendment will say. And one of the key figures to know for the Spanish-American War is Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt. He is the Assistant Navy Secretary at the time, and he orders Commodore George Dewey to sail to the Philippines while there's fighting in Cuba going on. Philippines at this time is controlled by Spain, and this idea is that if you go and take over the Philippines, Spain will not have a navy to send over to Cuba to fight Americans there. And he gets so bored at his desk position, he resigns from the Navy to lead his own cavalry unit. Theodore Roosevelt loved getting dirty and fighting, and that's what he will do. And the group that he leads, though, be known as the Rough Riders. Theodore Roosevelt High School in Boyle Heights, their mascot is the Rough Riders. That's Theodore Roosevelt right in the middle. And here will be the outcomes for the war, the Spanish-American War. In Cuba, the Rough Riders win a battle at Kettle Hill and San Juan. However, they went in after an all-black regiment, helped do some of the heavy work. And in August, only a few months after the war is declared, U.S. defeats Spain, and Spain agrees to stop the fighting. They sign an armistice agreement August 13th, 1898. And while there's fighting in Cuba, there's also fighting in the Philippines. Of course, George Dewey goes to Manila Bay on May 1st, 1898. They fought off the coast, not stormed the island until August, and they're aided by a Filipino named Emilio Aguinaldo, who was a revolutionary and wanted to get rid of the Spanish and hoped that once Americans helped them, he and fellow Filipinos would be able to run their own country. So there's some things to know. So after Spain is defeated, there is a new amendment called the Platt Amendment, and it outlines that the U.S. now has a right to intervene and preserve Cuban independence. If someone goes and messes with Cuba, the U.S. will jump in and take care of it. 2, Cuba could not make treaties with foreign nations, remove some autonomy from Cuba there. They can't make any deals with other countries. And 3, Cuba would give away Guantanamo Bay, a little place for the U.S. that they still have control of today, prison and military base. Okay, so the battle in Manila, American troops capture Manila in the Philippines, August 13th, 1898. And the Filipinos are aided by Emilio Aguinaldo. That's a statue of him on the right. And Filipinos helped the U.S. because they believed, like in Cuba, they would be granted independence. This, however, will not be the case. U.S. will hold on to the Philippines. And the question is, why did the U.S. not grant the Filipinos independence? So to continue, not everyone is okay with the U.S. going into other countries and taking them over. There will be the anti-imperialist league. They're opposed to America going into foreign nations. Some of the most famous members include Mark Twain, or Samuel Clemens, as he is his birth name. Famous author, writes Huckleberry Finn, and he's the one that coins the term the Gilded Age. Samuel Gompers, head of famous union leader, AFL, American Federation of Labor, 8 hours. He also is against imperialism because he feels that it would cheapen labor. Products will be made in other countries. And also Andrew Carnegie, the steel producer, for him, he's against it mostly because of social Darwinism. Why go over there? Those people will never learn or be as smart as us. It's just a big waste. And finally, we get to a settlement, a treaty between Spain and the U.S., the Treaty of Paris, another Treaty of Paris. This is like the third one by now. $20 million is given to Spain in exchange for the islands of Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. So the U.S. now has control of those 3 islands. Finally, war will break out with Filipino insurgents. They wanted the U.S. They had first helped the U.S. defeat the Spanish, but since the U.S. did not let them become independent, they fought to remove the U.S. out of the Philippines. It lasts for about 3 years. Both sides are committing atrocities, burning down entire villages. Some are being burned by American troops, others by Filipinos who are against groups that they feel are too nice to the U.S. So in total, 4,200 Americans will be killed, And in the Philippines, 20,000 soldiers are killed, while 200,000 civilians will be killed. Now, both, that's not just all caused by the US, some are also by the insurgents themselves. So the battle in Manila begins in 1899, and this is a photo of Private Walter Grayson, who by historian accounts, agree that he fired the first shots in the war on February of 1899, shot at 4 armed Filipinos, and it sparked the beginning of the Philippine-American War. Here are some pictures of American soldiers and some Filipino captives here. No real uniform. And some photos of some of the casualties of war. American soldiers. So in the Philippines, the war was quite atrocious for both sides. There were some accounts of men being savagely beaten or crucified. But at the end, after 3 years, the U.S. is successful, and there's got to be some reason why to keep the Philippines. If you look at the map, there are some certain reasons here why you would want to keep the Philippines. And here's the Philippines here. And then here's this big, giant country called China here, very close to each other. Philippines could be a stopping point on the way to China for more trade, and that's one major reason why you want to keep the Philippines. You can trade with a major population group in China. Also at this time, there's other countries, European countries, they all have spheres of influence. They have little pieces of China that they get to port in and trade with. The US, now being a major player, wants to get in on this action. So the spheres of influence, open door policy. China is controlled economically by European powers, primarily Britain. There's trade supremacy. These European countries have all control of China. And as I said earlier, the US wants in on the action. So the open door policy. China should be open to trade with whoever they want, not just the British. The open door policy is written up by Secretary of State John Hay. Open door notes calling for Chinese ports to accept ships from every nation. Of course, every nation meaning the United States. And the US wants to trade with China. So there's one big reason for keep holding on to the Philippines. It paves the way for the open door policy and trade with China. So you want to know the open door policy, the open door note. Finally, we get to the election of 1900. It's the repeat of 1896. President William McKinley again will go up against the populist William Jennings Bryan, and William Jennings Bryan will lose for a second time. He campaigns against imperialism. The U.S. should be pulled out. However, most Americans at this point do not care for anti-imperialism. They saw the U.S. quickly beat Spain in a matter of months for Cuba, in a matter of months in the Philippines. And McKinley campaigns on, well, American awesomeness, American prosperity. And he quickly defeats William Jennings Bryan all over again. However, just a few months after he is inaugurated in September, 4 months after, 6 months after, he is assassinated, bullet to the gut. He won't die from the bullet, but he will die from the infection. So he will be the third president assassinated, and that'll bring up his vice president up to the presidency, famous guy known as a Rough Rider. And Teddy Roosevelt will become the youngest president at 42. He was expected not to ever become president. He was thrown in there as vice president because they did not want him as governor in New York, causing all these changes. And Theodore, barrel-chested man, very short temper, stubborn, likes to get his way or else. And there's stories of him challenging congressmen down to the basement to box it out. He was an avid boxer, loved to fight, and if he couldn't get things done talking, he'll use his fists. And motto to know for Theodore Roosevelt is speak softly and carry a big stick, and he will be the brandisher of the big stick during his time as president. There's a cartoon of Teddy Roosevelt with his big stick, and what this means is speak softly, carry a big stick. It means diplomacy first, and if that doesn't work, then you've got to take action, and take action he will when he's president. One of the first things he sees is he is someone who read Alfred Thayer Mahan's book and was all about building a canal and having a strong navy. So if you look at the map here, difficulty of shipping from New York to San Francisco, you have to go all the way down from the bottom of South America, 13,000 miles. However, if you have a canal in Central America, you cut that down to more than half, 5,200 miles, and you can get to the west much faster. Now, there's a need for the canal. It took quite a while for Navy ships to get to the Philippines at that time, so the canal would be both a military necessity and also a trade necessity. So at first, Roosevelt, he enacts his motto. He spoke softly, negotiates with a treaty with Colombia, who is in control of Panama at the time. Colombia will get $10 million and $250,000 a year for the 6-mile wide strip of land. Colombia will say yes at first, but then eventually they'll back out of the deal, and this will cause Teddy Roosevelt to break out the big stick. So he orchestrates a revolt for Panama's independence from Colombia. Teddy Roosevelt sends a navy, and Colombia will give up immediately. Panama becomes an independent country, and because of the U.S.'s aid, they sign a treaty, and they will get $15 million and grant the U.S. control of the canal zone. So, big stick policy. First, you try diplomacy. If that doesn't work, then you take action. Teddy Roosevelt takes action and gets control of the Panama Canal. Now, the canal is a feat of human engineering here. Started in 1904. It takes about 10 years to make. Cost of $400 million, and hundreds of lives will be lost due to these tropical diseases like malaria, yellow fever. Since there are no drugs to combat that at that point, people will sacrifice themselves in order to build this canal. So two key engineers here, George Gettles and William Gorgas. Eventually they'll create ways to get rid of the mosquitoes, which helped workers to build this canal. And here are some pictures of the building of the canal. Lots of manpower, not a lot of machinery yet. Those are the locks on the right. Next thing to know is the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. James Monroe, back in 1823, when the U.S. was a very young nation, not a strong navy, told European nations to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. Any problems with Latin America would be the U.S.'s problems and not of Europeans. The U.S. at that time had no real power to enforce this, but European nations largely obliged to the Monroe Doctrine. Eventually, Roosevelt's corollary will be similar to the Monroe Doctrine. Many Latin American countries owe money. They're in debt to countries like England and Germany. And in 1902, England sent warships to Venezuela in hopes of collecting their debt or strong arm Venezuela. Theodore Roosevelt was worried Europe will keep intervening, so he issues the corollary where, same thing as the Monroe Doctrine, problems in Latin America are problems of the U.S. and European countries better stay away. Except this time, the U.S. has a very strong navy, and they have the muscle to scare the Europeans out. So the U.S. issues a corollary. U.S. has the right to intervene in Latin America. and the U.S. will expand its role in Latin America. However, it leads to more imperialism and sort of a strained relationship with Latin American countries until the U.S. is just kind of using them as a chess piece. That's the Monroe Doctrine, or the Roosevelt Corollary with the major candidates. So Theodore Roosevelt in 1905 wins a Nobel Peace Prize for negotiating a treaty between the Japanese and the Russians. There is a Russo-Japanese war, and Japan beat Russia. They beat them down, embarrassed the Russians, embarrassed white people in general, because this was the first time that a non-white country defeats a white country. It showed the strength of Japan. They felt like they had massive power, and they wanted to become imperialist just like the U.S. was. And this startled the U.S., which makes them want to pacify Japan and keep them from becoming this major power in the world. In 1908, there's the Gentleman's Agreement. Laws in California discriminate against Asian immigrants. Heavy nativism in California. Asians were sent to segregated schools that were usually run down and not well run because of this fear of yellow peril, meaning that the Japanese or Asians would take over and tear apart the country. Now, Theodore Roosevelt and Japan reach a compromise. Japan agreed to stop sending immigrants to the U.S., and that Roosevelt would pressure California to repeal its law and allow schools to be integrated with Asians, and that's what will happen. And finally, you get Roosevelt's Great White Fleet. Roosevelt builds all of these ships, steel-hulled white Navy ships, and he sends them all over the world to demonstrate U.S. power. It's like when you're growing up, you start lifting weights, and then by the time you're old enough, you start challenging people and showing off your muscle. And that's what Roosevelt did. He showed off American muscle with these ships going all over the world, the Great White Fleet. And here is one of these battleships sailed around the world, showing off American power and muscle. So there goes. That's the beginning of U.S. imperialism, how they become a world power. And from 1899 on, the U.S. will stick to being the world power that it is. And have a good day.